Chapter 199 By 8:14 on Thursday morning, Alden was dressed school uniform, on, educated, science lectures, viewed, and organized organizational software with multiplanetary calendaring, downloaded. He'd woken up in the mood for maximum efficiency. It was an urge he knew was driven by yesterday's realizations that he couldn't do everything he cared about and that he wouldn't be putting any significant amount of effort into impressing Baxter Washington and the Chicago superheroes. But it seemed like a useful urge, so he was welcoming it. Currently, he was sitting at one of the tables on the roof of the Forthright building, enjoying the sun in a bowl of sweet potato breakfast hash he'd gotten from the cafeteria, since Hoyu hadn't made oatmeal this morning. He was keeping the bowl preserved on his lap or in one hand while he worked on his laptop, setting up his new calendar to display times of day for Leafsung and Vethidaya as well as Nzidora. He'd just figure Rapuri time based on Vethidaya when he glanced at it. If someone ever stole or hacked his laptop, he didn't want them to see entries like wandering around the primary's home right here in the privately governed territory. Visits to Stuart or Yenupaith would just be labeled Artona I. Ooh. It does weather forecasts. It looked like Stuart was having a beautiful morning that would have felt like a hot tub to Alden, assuming he was at Leafsung right now instead of on veterinary duty for his cousin. Alden closed the forecast and unpreserved the hash so that he could take a couple of bites. It was just as fresh as when he had picked it up more than half an hour ago. The bearer of all burdens, keeper of hot potatoes, and preventer of wilted cilantro. Keeper of hot potatoes was amusing to him, so he clicked on the logogram for Yabi single quote T at the bottom right corner of the calendar. The date slid aside to reveal a character profile. So far, it just had his name and class on it, but if he'd been so inclined, he could have turned the animated character that would act out events he put on the calendar into his lookalike. When he'd gotten out of bed this morning, he'd wanted to make himself something like the schedules Nia had given him in intake. Typing, "How do busy avowed manage their schedules?" into the search bubble had landed him on the trim account of a local rabbit and right couple who were Anisidran lifestyle bloggers. They said every planet-hopping avowed needed this software, and Alden had clicked the link and bought it with only a passing thought that it was unusual how all the avowed testimonials on the website mentioned its realism. He'd been confused when he opened it and it asked him how many characters he wanted to make schedules for and what their classes were. Despite his rush to become more organized immediately, he'd had to take a few minutes to return to the internet and figure out that yes, he had bought the right thing, and yes, lots of avowed really did use it to plan their lives. They just weren't the main users of the software. Ordinary humans who liked role-playing as superhumans were. Alden didn't quite know what to make of that, but he couldn't deny that the product was thorough. It came with a map of Nzidora, and changing your character's foundation points and talents would alter the travel time to different destinations. He typed Keeper of Hot Potatoes in as his first skill and told the software it gave him the ability to fly, then he input a maximum speed. "Do I have my license yet?" the generic teen boy character asked. "I'll need a license to fly that fast. Should I add safe flight training and testing to my schedule?" "I have a special circumstances cookie license, so it's fine," Alden murmured, selecting the fully licensed option from a list. When he went back to the calendar, the travel time between campus and north of North had been reduced automatically. "This is nice." He finished filling out the next few days and then stared at what he had made. Is it a little overboard? According to his plan, he had to start doing homework soon, and the next time he'd be able to do something just for fun was unlisted. Sometime after he'd resolved his nightmare to his satisfaction, which could be as early as Tuesday if he was very amazing and sure of himself and ready for a healer to implant new dreams as soon as he saw her again. Or as far away as who knew when? Today, he had 15 minutes of free time, and they were right now. Tomorrow wasn't quite as long because he didn't have late-night training with Instructor Waker, but he had still packed every minute he could with productivity. And Saturday called for him to alternate hologram practice at North of North with spellbook reading, Thagun planning, fruit buying, and word chain training with Lutaflute was up for it. He hoped to head to Rapport either late Saturday or early Sunday because Sunday was also the first day of Stuart's weekend, and that meant there was a good chance they'd be able to hang out together for at least part of the day. And then it's school on Monday. Jim, back to the Rapport for a meeting with Healer Yenu. In the middle of the night according to my internal clock. It's a lot, but I can do this. Look how much I'm going to accomplish. His computer tinkled at him, and the keeper of hot potatoes appeared in a pop-up window. He was stepping into an animated version of the Forthright building. It's almost time for reading assignment intro to other worlds. I'm doing that at the Forthright building at 8:55 a.m. We are going to accomplish great things together. I can tell. Line of asterisks. Alden did homework, made comments of debatable depth and engaging with the unexpected, spent an hour fending off a hologram of a horse north of North, then spent 30 minutes in the recovery sauna while he answered messages and tried not to be distracted by his own curiosity about why an evil horse hologram had been so readily available. Mr. Washington, thank you for reaching out on behalf of the city and the heroes. Of course I would be happy to see Chicago again. If we can work around my schedule. He reread the email when he'd finished it. Telling the guy he was busy and his schedule would have to be worked around shouldn't have felt bold or rude, but it kind of did. It's just the truth. I want what he's offering, but not enough to drop everything for it. He sent the message, then moved along. Natalie wants to hang out this weekend. Alden frowned at her text. He'd only allotted himself 30 minutes for his Saturday lunch break. But Natalie had given him a turkey, and he had said he was interested in seeing the drudgery place with her. Next weekend could look like anything, but the weekend after next was almost definitely going to be spent on Artoni, since that had been the date of his original first planned visit to the Rapport. He thought about the problem while he showered off for exactly 5 minutes, as demanded by the schedule, and while he flew to the Forthright building on the Nonagon. His Intro to Other Worlds teacher was busy talking to a student from the last class, so that gave him time to rearrange his Saturday plans on the calendar. Aha! There are extra minutes here. If I eat breakfast while I fly to North of North and have Luke train me over supper. He clicked away at it, tightening it up and finding ways to multitask until the whole hour and 47 minutes appeared. Hi, Natalie. Saturday would work for me. Can I pick you up on Eshurdi's Nonagon at 11:35? Efficiency. Yeah. He rewarded the organizer for its help by giving his little avatar green eyes. Later, as he left the classroom, Vandy caught him in the hall. She looked more animated and eager than usual, and he assumed she wanted to talk about what had happened in gym last night. Hey, he said, stepping closer to one of the walls so that the river of uniformed teenagers could more easily flow past them. It was so great of your team to come help against Instructor Klein last night. Having 3 extra fighters as strong as you guys really made it all posse. You were using Happy Avowed Days greater than at the start of class. Yes. But I stopped when Instructor. I use it, too. Vandy said, putting a hand to her chest. If you link your organizer to your trim, then people can follow your schedule and see exactly where you're supposed to be on the map. I saw that option. Don't worry. I made sure not to check it. Thanks for the warning, though. Vandy's lips pursed. Yes. You're welcome. For the warning. I've got to go, said Alden. I'm supposed to be back at the dorm by 2:51. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. Would you mind hiding a cup of water from me? Like we did with the soup cup back before everything got crazy. Lute was sitting on the floor, watching his grandmother's daily progress report on the hunt for the real truth, with a look of extreme suspicion on his face. It fell away at Alden's question, and he paused the television. You mean for you to do some skill practice? Sure. And how was convo class? I don't go when you're not there, I guess. Instead, I went to North of North and trained to get my shield in front of a fast and sneaky horse in one of the combat hologram rooms. Woo-oh? Why? You were gone for too long, and I had to get a new hobby. I filled out my word chain ledger before bed last night. Should I turn it into you now? Wait at least another day, said Lute. I'm still recovering from spending so much time with Parvatitor. He stood up slowly and moved toward the kitchen in a tired, wobbly-looking way. Are you okay? Paying some dues, said Lute. Hiding a water cup isn't beyond me, though. In his room a short while later, Alden put his laptop on the desk and opened it. Time for skill practice. His avatar, under the impression that he only had a flying skill, was swimming around in the air above Garden Hall. There was also a quote about hard work paying off fading from the screen below him. I feel good about this, Alden thought as he settled on his learning cushion and tried to focus on himself and being the bearer of all burdens and his entruster. I'll dive into the targeting part of the affixation and explore that like last time. His first bump in the road came 20 minutes later when his little green-eyed pal proudly announced that he was going to do some more homework. Pulled away from trying to feel out the magic that connected him to Lute and the entrusted cup, Alden watched the avatar sit down with a book on a bench that didn't exist in the real Garden Hall garden. Alden had been too optimistic about his speed when he was planning this skill practice session. Do I keep going? Or quit? He'd been close, he thought. Cut a little time off the homework and keep at it, he decided, closing his eyes again. 14 minutes later, he found the glass inside Lute's closet, with a fisherman made of paper clips sitting on the rim of it, trailing a line into the water. The decoration made him forget his irritation at the delay, and he thanked Lute before dumping a cylinder of preserved water into his left hand. That's neat, Lute said from where he lay on the rug by the infrared fireplace. We could have some fun with that in arts. Or you could trick people into thinking you were a shaper. Alden had actually preserved the cup, too, though it wouldn't be obvious to Lute. He was supposed to do his homework now with both of these things preserved. Multitasking. Optimization. He would reclaim his lost minutes somehow. He carried his cup and his water back to his room and read the news articles about the submerger disaster that instructor Marion had assigned. Then it would be time for spellcasting, only the quietest stuff since Lute was in. Then new spell learning with his earring in. Then brainstorming about Thegund. Then prepping some supplies and questions for his session with Instructor Waker. Or, that was how it went on the schedule, anyway. The schedule didn't account for Alden being curious about one of the people interviewed in the article and wanting to know more. And it didn't account for the mesmerizing power of the earring well enough. And how could he have known this morning when he was planning all of this that his aunt would send him a picture of an engagement ring? He'd gotten a grip on the dark swell of emotion that had almost sucked him under when he'd first realized she was going to do this serious, happy family thing and he wasn't going to be around for it. He wasn't mad at her, now, but he still had to find his way through some complicated thoughts before he could call her and tell her he was, genuinely, glad to hear her good news. She'd seemed fairly certain about Brody before, but in a more thoughtful, less giddy way than Alden might have expected if he'd ever mentally written out the story of his Aunt Connie getting engaged. Today, she was absolutely giddy about the ring and saying yes, and she was also acting pretty shocked for a person who had already suspected this was coming. Brody had picked her up from the place where she'd started taking some new cosmetology classes, in an RV from the dealership where he worked. The vehicle was so humongous that Alden suggested, not that jokingly, they just move into it instead of the house. Brody was a tall guy, older than Connie, with a ruddy complexion and a slight punch. When she handed him her phone so that he and Alden could meet, he panicked. At least, Alden hoped it was panic that made him start talking about the different upholstery options available for this model of recreational vehicle. If he normally introduced himself that way, then it was going to be up to Connie to make friends for both of them. After a few minutes, she took the phone back from him and walked to the RV's bedroom to get some privacy. Or maybe just to rescue Alden and Brody from each other. I was going to let him sell me the UV-resistant fabric, said Alden. She was still wearing a huge smile. I told him already that we'd do the wedding whenever you could come. You do want to come? Of course I do. Will you have kids? I don't think the timing matters too much. I'm not really interested in doing one of those big extravaganzas with a flock of doves on a right work dance floor. Will I get to know them? Are you sure? he asked. I know the people who could make you a magic wedding dress. She shook her head. There was a giant bouquet of red roses reflected in the mirror door of the closet behind her. No. I can't imagine what something like that would cost. I have a pretty good idea. If they play baseball, will you remember to pick them up from practice? I love you, Aunt Connie. Will they know the person I grew up with at all? Or did they gun make her disappear, too? Love you, too, Alden. You know, you really do look so grown up in your uniform. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. How far are you behind now? Luke asked. An hour and 48 minutes, Alden grumbled as he stalked into the kitchen for a drink. Hoyu had been back for a while, and the apartment smelled good from whatever he'd put in the slow cooker. Luke played a mocking trill on Angela Aubergine. The harp had been moved into the living room since the last time Alden had passed through. Hot potatoes can do it all, Alden said, yanking open the fridge. Hot Potatoes is a mental performance athlete you invented, and he lives in a world where nothing ever interrupts him. I'm pretty sure I'm just having a rough start, and tomorrow the schedule will work. Are you two speaking in code on purpose? Lexi asked. Should you be mental texting about whatever the scheme is instead? He was standing in the middle of the kitchen with a line of marshmallows on the floor in front of him, one hand clenched by his side while the other gripped Ruther's handle. The chain whip was inching toward the nearest marshmallow almost shyly. Alden decided to cram 12 hours of work into 7 this afternoon, Luke said. That's what I've gathered from the things he says every time he emerges from his room. It sounds to me like he has to eat dinner on the toilet while he plots world domination if he wants to get back on track. I made vegan American food, Hoyu announced, coming down the hall damp-haired from his bath. But you can eat it whenever or save it if you want. Vegan American food. Yes. I said I'd cook a bunch of food you could eat, remember? But you haven't been here regularly, and then we had all the Thanksgiving things to finish. Alden's memory was fried after spending all afternoon and evening trying to get everything on his list done. Dredging up the promise Hoyu was talking about took him a while. When he managed to send me the long message during the disaster, he apologized because he was worried he'd been rude on the bus and said he'd cook for me. I do remember. What are we having? Sloppy Joes. But with veggie stuff instead of beef. Hoyu stepped over the line of marshmallows and went to look in his cooker. Do you like it? I can't actually recall the last time I had one. But yeah. I do. So while his avatar continued to race ahead of him, he ate Sloppy Joes with his roommates. Unlike certain other Joes, they weren't at all disappointing. Line of asterisks. Alden was in the MPE gym, in a suit, by 9:45 p.m. He wouldn't have the whole floor to himself for his private lesson. It was currently sectioned off into 8 large blocks, and 4 of them were already in use, since the barriers had been made opaque to provide the occupants with some privacy. Big Snake was there early, too, waiting in one of the corner blocks with his arms akimbo in a pose that was reminiscent of some of his more memorable superhero imagery. If he just had on his cowboy boots. I hope this all goes well. Hi, Instructor Waker, he said when he reached the man. Thanks for donating time tonight. Thank you. Think of how embarrassing it would have been if I'd volunteered and none of my students wanted to see my face outside of class. I don't think that would happen. I brought you something. What's this now? Big Snake asked as Alden presented him with a yogurt container full of hot leftovers and a hamburger bun in cling wrap. It's from Hoyu. He thought you might like it. He has a slow cooker. Lexi had argued that giving a teacher a cup of sandwich filling was odd. Hoyu had countered that lots of people gave teachers homemade sweets, so why wouldn't homemade savories be welcome, too? It's a vegan Sloppy Joe, Alden said. Big Snake was already pouring it onto the bun, which looked snack-sized in his hand. He took a big bite out of it and chewed. That's the kind of pre-workout snack you want, isn't it? He said after he'd swallowed. Since you're here early, and I'm here early, let's talk for a minute. Alden nodded. A few seconds later the walls of their block went opaque. No sound in or out, said the instructor, nodding at the nearest wall of the spacious rectangular block. "And we can have drones film or not depending on what you want. Some people don't like them." He took another huge bite and gulped it down. "I've got lots to say, and there's plenty I can teach. But we've only got a couple of hours here, so what are you hoping we'll do with the time you've earned?" It was actually such a difficult question. Alden had spent a significant portion of his evening thinking it through. "I need help with the book, of course," had been his first thought, but the more he tried to figure out the specifics of what he'd ask Instructor Waker for, the more he realized he was doing a decent job already of prepping for the most obvious stuff. Getting his shield in front of a charging foe was something he could practice for hours at North of North if he wanted. The MPE gym would be better, but not so much better that he needed that to be the main thing they did tonight. "There have been a few times recently when I've felt like I was getting closer to some important realizations about my skill, or maybe just like I was more in sync with it. I thought it would be. The word I'm looking for definitely isn't fun. I thought it would be valuable to try to repeat some of those moments here in the gym. I don't really expect to have a breakthrough in a single night, but it would be good to dig into those situations a little more, and there's not time in regular class." "Yeah," said the instructor, smiling. "You want to try the catching again?" Eyes closed. "Some more dangerous projectiles than last time?" "I would like to do that. And maybe a little something like last night. Torsten thought you might have had a good moment there when he hit you with the crate. We should save heavy hits on your skill for the end, though, so we don't fatigue you too much." "That would be good, too. Got something else?" Alden swallowed. "There was this small, near-drowning incident during the flood. And I'm pretty sure the dueling block can get pitch black, and the suit can make me feel like I can't breathe, and I could hold one of those realistic dummies we have in the storage room and you could, like, toss me around a little and rip it out of my arms while I'm trying to save it." Big Snake was still smiling. "That's a good sign. Could we try that once?" "Hell no," Big Snake said. "I'm gonna go get us some tennis balls." Chapter 200 Disappointed. Alden let the last swig of cold water from the bottle sit in his mouth for a second longer before swallowing and answering the instructor. "A little." His feet were surrounded by tennis balls. He kicked one lightly with the toe of his sneaker and watched it roll across the soft tiles Instructor Waker had put down for him. With no other students to pay attention to, Big Snake was being more creative. His throws were coming from every direction. Sometimes he was somersaulting over Alden's head and dropping the tennis balls from above, or he was bouncing them off the walls of their private block. It was a good workout. The catching and the returns were at a difficulty level that matched the one Alden had found success with before. But he couldn't seem to fall into the right frame of mind, and when he closed his eyes and tried to force it, he just got pelted. He was sure he'd have earned a concussion from at least one of those throws if he wasn't in the gym. "I'm sorry it's not happening," he said. "You even got me ground to jump around on." Instructor Waker tossed a ball to him, and Alden caught it with his free hand. Preserving it was simple, of course, but he wasn't getting that feeling that had led his body to move in pursuit of balls he could barely reach. He wanted to find that flow state where it became him, his entruster, and the thing he'd been given to protect. "You have any ideas why it's not working the way you want it to right now?" "No." "Have a think about it for a minute," Big Snake said. "Don't answer so fast. You're usually a good thinker. I see you in class." Alden was tired and irritated with himself. He was afraid he was wasting this whole session. Thinking sounded like a larger ask than usual. He fiddled with the lid on the bottle. "I might have fried my concentration today. I spent a really long time studying before I came here." "Other classes treating you all right?" "They're fine. I do a lot of personal study, so it's not just school work." "That's good to hear. I think hobbies are important, and being avowed gives you a leg up on some things. What are you into?" Alden's fingers paused their journey around the water bottle. "I walked into this one. Art and culture. Wizardry. Origami. An origami of the self. I was doing parkour and intake, with a group in F, but I haven't had much time for that lately." "Sounds like fun stuff. Hobbies don't usually weigh that heavy on a person's concentration in my experience. Do you think maybe you're a little unhappy to be doing this instead of the thing you requested? No. It was too much. I wish I hadn't asked. He really did. If he'd gotten to try it, that would be one thing. The hard no, on the other hand. Keeping my mouth shut would have been safer. Now he feared he'd stirred up fresh drama. Forget I brought it up, please. Big Snake shook his head. Not gonna forget that one, and I'm too honest to say otherwise. But we don't have to talk about it right this second unless you want to. I brought it up because I wondered if your skill was harder to get along with when your target was someone you were feeling annoyed at. Alden stared down at the gouge in the turf. It wasn't like he'd never considered the role the entrustor played in making it all work. He thought that how he felt about the person he was bearing burdens for probably did matter in some ways. But to what extent it mattered was a question that was inconvenient to explore for a number of reasons. The least of which was that it was hard to weigh the importance of entrustor, burden, and bearer against one another. He remembered Stuart sending balls of mulch at him and encouraging him to think of them as helpless children to get in a more protective frame of mind. Now you're smilin'. Did I say something funny? Alden shook his head. I do suspect the skill is easier to use when I'm sacrificing and suffering, I'm in certain moods. But it still works when I'm in a bad one. And I'm not annoyed with you. I'm annoyed with myself. Big Snake rubbed a chin that had a great beard today. He shifted from completely clean-shaven to fully facial-haired when it suited him. What were you hoping to learn from the experience? What about it was so valuable you wanted to revisit it? For just a few seconds something stayed preserved even though I wasn't physically holding it. He mentally apologized to Zoraide for calling her in it. He just didn't want Big Snake to ask who the person had been. He probably will anyway. He knows I wanted to practice with a dummy. The instructor whistled. That would be a game changer for you. I see why you're interested. But I can't think of a healthy way to help you get all the way there tonight. And from personal experience, some of what you can do when you're at your limit stays something that only happens when you're at your limit. Most people who've managed to double on their foundation points have only done it once or twice. First time it happened to me, I was wild chasing after a way to make it into an ability I could use whenever I wanted. Aren't the side effects supposed to be bad? Yeah. They are not great. The system's got all of our foundation points very specific, very balanced so that we work right. But when you're filled with adrenaline, and you somehow tap into that extra, you don't do it in a balanced way. And if you're a brute who's used to supplementing and leveraging your foundation points with your other talents, you discover that skills and spells don't always play nice with you being more powerful than usual. I wanted to try it again, though. I worked on it. Even got myself invited to some big parties on the Triplanets and got acquainted with a bunch of wizards while they were in good moods. So that I could ask them about it. I still can't make it happen on purpose, and I don't think I'm supposed to be able to. But I figure it will be there for me when I'm in trouble one day. So some of what an avowed can do is like that, last resort, dark day stuff. All the things that aren't like that you're going to be able to do on sunny days? They'll come to you with practice. Normal practice. And you're 16. You've got time for lots of normal practice, don't you? Big Snake barked a laugh. We're gonna make you do so much normal practice here before you graduate that you'll be sick of it. And then when you're ready for a break, we just shove you straight into uni with an even bigger gym and even more practice. To his own surprise, Alden found himself cracking a smile. You know our gym classes aren't normal, right? They banned dodgeball at my old school because one guy got a bloody nose. Avowed normal. Big Snake kicked the ball into the barrier and caught it on the rebound. What I'm saying is that there's no rush for this kind of thing. We push you kids hard in class, but that doesn't mean pushing even harder is better. Challenge yourself but don't hurt yourself for a trick that'll belong to you in due time if it's meant to belong to you. I understand. Alright. You want to try a little more of this or switch it up? Alden thought about it. It's actually good to be doing this in the gym, on the grass, without my word chain. Practicing the movement trait without worrying about hurting myself is helpful for me. Want me to make you get some more leg work in? I can do that. Line of asterisks. The private lesson was only supposed to last until midnight, but it ended closer to 12:30, with Alden trying to protect the dummy and himself from the blows of a club Big Snake was swinging at them. Gently, by his standards. Alden blocked with shielded objects of different sizes, shapes, and weight before finally finishing with a sweatshirt he'd brought with him in his duffel bag. He wanted to practice preserving and unpreserving the clothes he was wearing during an attack. It was worthwhile, he decided about 20 minutes later. He'd showered, and he was wearing the same sweatshirt as he left the MPE building. After the short conversation during their practice, he'd caught a glimpse or two of the way he'd moved on the day he'd managed to catch with his eyes closed, though he hadn't fallen as deeply into the process. Alden. Big Snake had just stepped out of the door behind him. Do you mind if I walk with you? We're headed in the same direction if you're on your way back to the dorms. I'm definitely going there. I need to collapse onto a mattress as soon as possible. They walked across the dark campus together in a silence that Alden kept expecting Big Snake to break. When he didn't, Alden ended up doing it himself. I might miss gym class again. On Wednesday. I expect to make it, but I'll be on Ortona I on Tuesday and I'm not sure when exactly I'll be back. If you don't show up, we'll assume that's where you are then. No need to call from there unless you just miss us that bad. Too expensive. Beneath their feet, the same chalk artist who decorated the rooftop of Forthright had drawn another piece. This one featured famous about living their everyday lives instead of fighting against the floodwaters. The artwork was illuminated not only by the pathway lights, but also by the glowing chalk that had been used to draw the light sources in the image. Alden was walking between a firework and a skyscraper with half the windows shining. I do know my skill is growing, he said. I really know that. And I know there's time to figure it out and get better at using it. When I'm thinking clearly, anyway. He didn't want to put the buts into words, so they just flowed through his thoughts instead. When I think of all the terrible things that can happen, getting stronger feels like an answer. I've just realized how far bearer of all burdens has truly come since I made it back to Earth, and maybe, if it goes just a little bit farther, I can take a nightmare off my plate and put some of the fear to rest. You're doing good, said Morrison Waker. Have people told you that already? Principal Sleyca and Instructor Klein mentioned that my progress in class was enough to take a break if I wanted. If I was too delicate to handle school was what they meant, though, so it felt less complimentary. Not just in gym. You landed on the island and passed through intake without a hitch. Got yourself here to one of the best schools in Apex. And from the outside, it seems like you're getting along with most of your classmates. New friends. Yeah. My roommates are great. Not too homesick? I'm okay, said Alden, thinking of the letter he'd sent Baxter Washington earlier. Most of the time. Then you're doing good. And I don't mean good for someone who's been through stuff that other people don't have to deal with. I'd tell you that you were doing good even if you were a globee coming here straight from an ordinary situation. You were doing a very good job with this life that came your way unexpectedly. Alden didn't respond for a few seconds after the praise landed. He wasn't sure how deserved the words were, but they did wipe away some of his worry that he had come across as a person with warped judgment tonight. Thanks, he said finally. I'm trying. So, are you talking to someone about whatever happened to put you in the situation you described earlier? I knew he was going to ask. Yes. It's less shocking and more magically induced thought sorting so far, but that counts. And he had talked about it. With Stuart and Bo to varying degrees. With Asherty if that conversation right afterward counted. The school knew he had access to a local therapist, and he'd told them what he was going to the Triplanets for. Without giving much detail, but still. If they try to stick me in a room with a Chilena North branded counselor as well, I think I'll say Yenupez forbids it. He was working on himself for himself right now. He liked how it had gone on the inward path. One more person trying to prime to him, that's good to hear. Big Snake said easily. "Just so you know, though, if you ever need another ear, I can make both of mine huge." Alden turned his head to look at the man. "What? Do you wanna see?" Alden snorted. "No. I believe you. Garden Hall was just ahead. You're doing good. You've got time. And I've got ears. That's all I wanted to say. Go get some rest." "I will. I appreciated the training. It was fun. See you in class tomorrow." When Alden entered the dorm, it was quiet. The ripped shirts from the game that had been going on last night were all in a box labeled free. On the wall above them, the community notice board was displaying dozens of digital sticky notes. Tapping on one would expand it to provide details about whatever event was listed on it. Hot Potatoes is like 3 hours ahead of me right now. Even if I concede that I might be overambitious on the scheduling front, there's still not room for. He glanced at the notes in one corner of the board as he passed. The Chilean and North Carolers were holding tryouts. A group called Levelheads was meeting tomorrow morning out by the grill. And in the afternoon, an information session was being held in one of the lecture halls for students who were considering transferring to another program. Alden kept walking. He opened the door to the apartment and headed to his own room as quietly as he could. It was dark except for the kitchen light. Lexi would definitely be asleep by now, and the other two probably would be as well. After he'd stripped out of his sweats, he opened his laptop to check Happy About Days. His avatar was already asleep, with little zzz's coming out of his mouth. Show off. He considered all of the undone things on the list for today. You're doing good. You have time. The stupid schedule could be sorted out tomorrow, he decided. He would take at least one thing off and put it on another day. Maybe give the avatar a blue messenger bag and permission to eat sitting down at a table instead of while he was doing homework on an Omegon flying over Apex. He set his alarm and pulled himself up into the loft bed. That night, he dreamed of Thegund. He chased the sound of Kibby's whistle, and he couldn't find her. Instead, he found a horse that jumped like a grasshopper while he threw tennis balls at it. When he woke up, he remembered the whole thing. Alden wasn't sure if the changes in the nightmare constituted an improvement in his mental health or a step back, but he hoped he didn't have to describe it in detail to Yanupezth. Chapter 201 Friday evening's MPE class ended with a bang, a scream, and some whimpering. The bang came from Reinhardt's final shot blowing a hole in the regenerating barricade that had been added at the halfway mark. The instructors and volunteers must have thought they needed to up the difficulty level since everyone knew in advance what was in store for them. The new obstacle was similar in appearance to the usual gym barriers, but much more penetrable. It extended to the ceiling and had to be broken through to complete a run. The scream was Marsha's as she arrived at the finish just in the nick of time to connect with her teammates and win, but not fast enough to engage Gallicourse in a fight, which seemed to have been a personal goal for her all class. And the whimpers belonged to the members of the 4 teams that had failed to achieve a single victory. There was no prize for a second win, but Alden's team had managed one about halfway through the session. That success came courtesy of Lucille, who'd smashed a hole in the barricade for her own team that they'd been able to reach before it closed, an aircon. Traveling with him required strong stomachs and nerves of steel. A couple of the trips they'd braved had ended in deaths, but it worked out on flight number 4. Afterward, Hoyu declared the large wooden turtle shell they'd flown unlucky, and mused that it looked like it might have been a stylish piece of interior decor before it broke and ended up in Big Snake's projectile pile. In response, Lexi announced that residents of the Huntski Lodge were only allowed to have one oversized personal item at a time in the living room. The other winners were Soren's team and Max's. He, Finley, Jeffy, Astrid, and Lucille had reached the finish 3 times. Even Lucille had cheered on their last victory, and Max was looking pretty smug as the wind, the Jean-Demirs, Big Snake and Klein all stopped attacking for the day. The students who'd been suffering simulated injuries had their suits instantly restored, and Jeffy ran toward the locker room yelling, "Pizza moves!" Hoyu gasped. "Get me off this ice patch. I need to get to the ovens first." Seconds later, helped along by a shove from Everly, he was sprinting after Jeffy. Alden thought Hoyu was talking about the oven in the Garden Hall community kitchen. He'd been hovering over a beef stew he'd made in his slow cooker all afternoon. It was something he thought would impress his mother during their family dinner tonight. Maybe there's a baked dish to go with it. It wasn't until he'd rushed through a shower in the locker room that Alden realized Hoyu had meant something else. He was sitting on a bench, uniform back on and fresh socks in hand, when he caught a joke about how the school didn't need to provide ovens for their party since they had Soren in their class. "Are they cooking the pizzas fresh?" he asked. "It's a pizza party," said Khan. He stood nearby, drawing something on his cheek with a paint pen. "I know, but I thought they'd buy boxes of pizza from somewhere. That would just be ordering pizza for dinner, not a pizza party." Lexi said that like it should be obvious. Before Alden could express his approval for the distinction, he found himself looking up at Mehdi, who was smiling at him pleasantly. "So, before class started," Mehdi said, "when we were talking about," Alden didn't hold back his groan. Mehdi had caught him on the way into the building earlier and initiated a conversation. If one person asking the same question in 11 different ways and the other failing to answer it satisfactorily could be called that. Mehdi clearly had more hours in his day than normal people, and he'd spent them watching footage from their last class obsessively. He needed, to know about. Klein's pause, said Mehdi. Alden knew the phrase had capital letters and the other boys had just by the way he said it now and had said it before. Repeatedly. "You are really single-minded sometimes." "Thank you." When Klein paused, "Why do you think that happened? Was it your skill, or was he not trying as hard as usual? What % of his effort do you think he was?" "Man, I don't know how hard he was trying." Alden tugged his left sock on. "You'd have to ask him. And does it even matter? It took him half a second to burst through my shield. He was on his last leg, literally, after all of you had attacked him. I didn't do anything but stand there and get crushed a little slower than he anticipated. Did you see what Lexi did to him? Look at Lexi." "That's right," called Khan. He was adding something that looked like wings to his face paint. Alden was guessing Khan was getting an official logo. "Feast your eyes upon my brother. Killer of Aji brutes and innocent Tama," he squawked as a shoe flew across the room and hit the arm he was drawing with. "My point is that practically every contribution to Klein's well-deserved defeat was bigger than mine." "But you're a B," and he paused. Mehdi said. "Yes," said Alden. He did. A few people glanced his way at that, but most were focused on Khan, who'd just painted a stripe across his face and jabbed himself in the eye. Instructor Klein might have been tired, and he was dealing with a lot of danger, Fabry said. Sometimes, even the agilest of agility brutes can, under these kinds of extreme conditions, trip. Everyone laughed. "Keep telling yourself that, Feb. I watched you trip almost as many times as I watched Instructor Klein die." "I did, too. Greater than. Ignacio." Mehdi let it go, at least for now, and as Alden tied his shoes, the guys moved on to talking about another subject. "Are you faster than light?" No. Don't leave out the nasty little fucker part. Ouch. It's going to be a while before Winston escapes from this. He wasn't even in the locker room, unless Alden had missed seeing him head into a stall. Most likely he was dawdling in the gym, trying to avoid them all. Alden wasn't fully in the loop on class gossip, but in this case, it was loud enough that he'd been unable to avoid knowing that a few of the people with more active social media presences had made a bigger deal out of their post-gym updates than usual. Special guests, a prize on the line, and an exciting defeat of their instructor meant there was a lot to say. The students who normally posted a picture of themselves in the unitard and a quick update about how they had performed had decided to show footage. Most of the people involved in the Klein attack were pleased to have their contributions shared. Even if nobody said outright that Winston had failed to follow through on a promise to participate, there were enough hints and enough videos for the fans who had nothing better to do with their time to correctly surmise that either Winston or Rebecca had committed a betrayal. A few classmates on following Winston had clarified for the curious which party was the guilty one. Alden was also aware that people were commenting on his pigeon picture again. He had taken down his pound sign Matador Thanksgiving, please, no more food post. Now the comments were full of some strangers berating him for not appreciating their contributions on the removed post and others thanking him for putting the shrine of the line back into its rightful place on top. Elijah was occasionally posting under it in a mix of Lithuanian and English, thinking up ever more obscure ways to say that Alden was a hazard to poultry. The next time he was an F, Alden was going to feed the ducks and take their picture just for her. Line of asterisks. When they made it outside, Hoyu was already the proud owner of 2 flatbreads. He took off for the dorm after instructing Alden and Lexi to show up later with dessert pizza. Does anyone else worry that the ocean will attack us again if we eat together as a class? Fabry asked. No? Just me. All right. I called the oven in the middle. The food was set up for them between the building and the track. Astrid was pressing buttons on a jukebox that looked like it could have been designed by the same person who had made a Mr. Blingy vending machine Alden had seen at the right shop. Discs of pizza dough waited at one end of a table full of toppings, and 3 small pizza ovens were ready to serve. The one in the center was mostly transparent, so everyone had a clear view of Jeffy's chicken nugget and cheese pizza getting blistered. The ovens cooked a pie in under 2 minutes. And it wasn't long before Alden found himself sitting at one of the same picnic tables that had been set out during combat assessment day, wondering if the amount of garlic oil he had added to his tomato, basil, and mushroom pizza had been greed or wisdom. Wisdom, he decided, sinking his teeth into the first piece. As the sun set, they hid light from the track, the ovens, and Soren. Alden went to make a dessert pizza to take back to the apartment with him. He was trying to decide if he could do half apple cinnamon and half chocolate strawberry or if that would make the place where they met in the middle gross, when he realized that the figure hunched over an unbaked crust at the end of the toppings table was Winston. Alden was going to ignore him. He hoped to be ignored in return. He separated the toppings with a dam made of pecans, feeling clever about it, then he headed toward the ovens. I'm going to make an apology video tonight, Winston said. A good one. Alden turned back to him. The speedster had made a feather on top of his pizza by tearing the prosciutto into strips and arranging it. Don't you ever get sick of making every minute of your life about your brand? Alden kept the thought to himself. That's nice to hear, he said. Apology videos are probably hard to make. Good luck with it. Will you comment on it? Something positive. The point of an apology video might have gone over your head a little there, Winston. Slapping down someone who was, possibly, trying to do better wasn't an impulse he thought he should indulge. You're going to apologize for Thanksgiving, too. For making up stuff about me and HNT on a shirty? He asked. Winston didn't answer right away, but then he nodded. You could just apologize to my face right now. Yeah, I'll make a positive comment, Alden said. On the way back to Garden Hall on board the Nonagon with Lexi and a perfectly preserved pizza, he decided he was glad about the apology video after all. Even if it wasn't as sincere as he'd want in a perfect world, it would be good to settle the tension he felt every time he saw Winston coming. He'll say something apologetic, I'll say something positive, and then we can not bother each other ever again. He enjoyed eating a piece of apple pizza with his roommates and Mr. and Mrs. Jangdemir. Hoyu's mom laughed at the giant bromeliad he was trying to keep alive and raised an eyebrow at his spotless bedroom. She was right to be suspicious. Hoyu's room was never that clean on a normal day. Alden showed off his dishwashing abilities before they left, and Hoyu seemed happy about how it had all gone. Just after 11, in his own room, Alden put his Oreo back around his neck and rose from his learning cushion. He'd finished giving his leaf bookmark some sunshine and a few drops of water from the melting ice cube he'd made a while ago. Spell review before bed was satisfying. He sent the books back into storage and stuffed the vegan marshmallow he'd crushed into his mouth. He wasn't hungry, but squashing marshmallows would be a weird habit to explain if his roommates ever found a bunch of them in the trash. Buying more was on his to-do list. Since Lexi had started using them for his rather practice, They'd been disappearing fast. He went to the desk under his loft bed and opened his computer to mark meditation completed on his happy avowed day schedule. If he called the spell practice that, then the avatar would sit on the cushion he'd given it at the appropriate time. Finished. Checking out Winston's apology was the last thing he had to do before sleep. Beside his laptop, his opposite stone blinked as he navigated to the video. Just 5 minutes of. It's how long? He said aloud, aghast as he saw the time listed at the bottom. Winston had apologized for over half an hour. I'm not watching that. He tagged the whole class. Fine, but I'm only watching it at double speed until he gets to the part about me. He put his headphones on and pressed play. It's been a tough week, everybody, said Winston. He looked less vibrant than usual. I know on Fridays I usually post my wins of the week, but this week I need to talk to you about loss. This week, I made some mistakes. This week, the one who needs a healing is me. He moistened his lips then gazed soulfully at the camera. Alden watched the whole thing. He had to watch the whole thing because he was waiting for the part of the apology he actually cared about. Surely it was coming. Winston was laying the sorrow on thick. Someone who missed the word sandbag might be forgiven for thinking he'd ripped an infant out of Soren's arms instead. It wasn't terrible, though. Over the top. Some corny slogans to appeal to his fans. But he did apologize for things. When they got to the part where he told the entire country of Scotland he was sorry about some incident involving a care package Finley had gotten from home, Alden thought surely the assured apology would be next. But the video ended with Winston thanking his fans for understanding that he'd be taking a 4-day break from vlogging so that he could recenter himself and heal his bonds with these wonderful people he was in school with. That's it. Did I miss it? He hadn't. Sighing and pulling off the headphones, he pushed himself back from the desk. That's 20 minutes of my life I'll never get back. Why the hell did he tag me if he wasn't going to do the thing? You suck, Winston. You suck so much. He considered typing the ARF dog jingle onto the video, to make his position clear to the world. Then he thought about posting a video of his own, in which he waxed the nonagon slowly while he stared into the camera and counted to the number 9. Then he went to sleep, because he was sure he'd regret enacting petty revenge fantasies come morning. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. Stop rolling around in the sand, and tell me what to do with your product. Soft, breathed a woman's voice. So soft. But still. Salty. Whispered a man. I don't care, said Alden. Just tell me how to spray it on my hair. The disembodied voices on the softly salty website ignored him, as did the actors and actresses gleefully kicking and throwing sand. And writhing around on the beach like they didn't understand how to use one in a normal way. There was no option to skip the commercial, so he watched to the end, when all the people in their swimsuits took turns dumping buckets of sand on one another's heads. The sand baptisms refreshed their hairdos, and they ran toward the waves together hand in hand with their miraculously grit-free locks blowing in the wind. Is it only soft and salty? Murmured the unseen guy with a hypnotist voice. Or is it something magical? Finally, Alden was in. He read through the instructions for how to use his new styling spray. He'd already used it according to the more minimal directions on the back of the bottle a couple of times, but he'd pretty much just scrambled it around with his fingers a little and hoped for the best. He thought now was a good time to try to get that right. Saturday had dawned sunny and warm, and he was actually beating the keeper of hot potatoes at their shared schedule. His homework had been easier to breeze through than expected. And he was going to eat lunch with Natalie, so he had a rare opportunity to wear his new clothes instead of the uniform. The jeans were a given. He was still trying to decide between the tailored button-up and the Hawaiian shirt. He squinted at himself in the bathroom mirror and worked on the hair. Video call from 2761st General View Lart single quote H, Artona connection fee waived. Stuart? It was the last day of school for the Artonan week, and he should be at Leaf Sung. But he seemed like a more likely caller than Vuel herself. Let's find out. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. She must be part of my parents' conspiracy, but I do not understand how her current behavior helps them. Stuart had called to make sure Alden wanted to teleport in this evening, but although that could have been covered quickly, they were still talking to each other 20 minutes later. Or Stuart was talking. Alden was back in his room, sitting at his desk and listening. Instead of being at Leaf Song, Stuart was at the sibling hold, outside in the forest in a place Alden hadn't yet seen. Tables made of different materials stood in a clearing, and he was working at one of them. He had been ordered home from school by his cousin so that he could brew a potion she wanted to give to someone as a gift. Apparently this kind of thing had now happened one too many times, at very inconvenient moments for him, and he'd grown suspicious of Embinaret's intentions. He'd spent the majority of the call so far expressing his belief that she had joined in on the change Stu's mind plan. Alden was trying to provide a sympathetic ear, even if he didn't understand how Stuart had arrived at the conclusion. You can't think of any other reason she might have called you away from your favorite class? No, Stuart said. Alden had a very clear memory of a bean-shaped tunnel blowing a hole in a goo-filled sackfruit just as Embinaret walked past it. While they talked, Stuart was walloping something that looked like styrofoam packing peanuts, but crunchier, with a mallet. The pieces that flew off were getting caught by a spell he'd cast that wafted them out of view. Alden didn't know if they were being disposed of or if they were going into a cauldron off-screen. It is strange she didn't just buy the potion, Alden said. Instead of having you make it. That's not strange. It's going to be gifted to someone as a relationship marker. They have known each other for 3 years, and she wishes to acknowledge their importance to each other. So it should be made by her. An Mban can't make her own 3-year anniversary potion because her free authority has just been bound. Got it? What I do as her battery is to her credit greater than, not mine, so it's proper that I make this for her. But she has waited to request my assistance until I was enjoying favored learning experiences several times now. Too many times for all of the occurrences to be happenings of chance. She has motives greater than. It had been less than a human week since the two of them had overheard the conversation about how Stuart needed to be persuaded away from the path he wanted and how some of his parents thought Alden might be useful for that cause. Alden was still feeling stung when he thought about it, so it was to be expected that Stuart wasn't over it. He was probably getting a fresh dose of hurt and anger every time he saw one of his own parents. But Embinaret pestering him when he wanted to be at school seemed more innocent to Alden. Don't Vataris become properly educated in many useful subjects? He asked. Isn't learning one of their duties? Yes. Of course. So shouldn't Embinaret be encouraging you to study more, not less, if she is in agreement with your parents? Stuart frowned. Have you considered the sackfruit? Alden asked. That? He looked surprised. Alden, Mban wouldn't have made me offer apologies to instructor Karazud over something like that. She wouldn't? It was only some juice on her clothes. Something more must nest in her thoughts for her to interfere with my school. He slammed his mallet into some more packing peanuts. Your hair is all pointing to your right. Why? Does it look good? Is right a significant direction for a human's hair to point in? I'm going to have to end our call now, Alden told him. So that I can make my hair point in more directions. See you soon. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. Alden picked Natalie up on the roof of her building in Boomtown. She was wearing a peach-colored shirt, white shorts, and a pair of those amber-dyed canvas tennis shoes that all the girls at Alden's old school had been into last year. She smelled like vanilla and fresh bread as she jumped eagerly on the nonagon and said, "We match today." Alden blinked and looked down at himself. Our sunglasses. Natalie pulled a pair out of her purse that were similar to the beachy green ones Alden was wearing, only yellow. Hey, we do. He said, watching her put them on. And you wore a tropical shirt. It's nice. We're both pretending it's a real summer day. He watched her step over to the other side of the nonagon and peer down, then she knelt to rub her hands over the green surface. So cool. This is the nine-edged sun whose own mother forsakes him. What is he made of? I do not know. Who's his mother? I think it might be the planet. Or the concept of the planet. Or a craftswoman who didn't like this nonagon. It's also possible Asherty was just making fun of me when he insisted I call it that. Sky Traffic Control called it a galetta. Nice cookie, said Natalie, patting the nonagon. Don't drop us. She looked back at Alden. Do I have to sit down or can I stand up like you? Either's fine. I usually sit. Just don't fall off. If you do fall off, eat right away. I don't think I'm good enough to catch a falling person. She was unconcerned about the warning, judging by the way she immediately sprang back up and walked to the edge again. You still want to go to the Drudgery Chest restaurant, right? He asked. Right. It's called Meal Greater Than Presto. Artonin in Italian, an unlikely combination. And it's serving Greek food today. And every Saturday there's a free spells event on the street in front of it. Lots of people sit around chatting and seeing if anyone wants them to use their talents. Their sunglasses met. It's still unreal sometimes, isn't it? Alden said. Living on Anzidora with a bunch of avowed. Or is that just me? I'm still surprised about it all the time. Alden nodded. You just never know when some rabbit is going to pick you up off of a roof on an Artonin flying contraption, Natalie added. It's a weird place. Tope continued.